Hey everybody, welcome to the live Q&A for Make Readers Fall in Love with Your Story. Oh my gosh, we got so many great questions. I'm going to do my best to give succinct answers so that I can get to all of them. Thank you so much everybody who submitted a question live on the training, and also to those of you who submitted questions ahead of time. All right, I'm going to jump right in. If it looks like I'm not looking at you guys, sorry, it's because I'm reading your questions. All right, so first question is, how do I get people to buy book 2? It's a continuation from book 1 and ends, or does it? All right, so Jay, you may not like this answer, but the way to do it is to make sure you have planted seeds in book 1 that people want to see grow in the next book. So the reason you might not like that answer is because if you don't already have seeds, then you go, oh, dope. But there are ways to plant the seeds, like go back in time. You can always, in a secondary book, include a scene that takes place in the timeline of the book before, but it's all about planting those seeds. When we're emotionally connected, we want to know what happens to that character. It's as simple as that. So people wanting to read to the end is just continuing to plant. There's a way your character is vulnerable, or there's something your character wants, and we are on board. We want to keep reading. So again, if you haven't planted those seeds already in book 1, you can plant them after the fact in book 2. Just show us what your character wants and why she's vulnerable, and we will want to keep reading as long as her story goes on. All right. Next question. I need some help with dialogue in my first-person novel. Should you give me some tips on making it pop? Ooh, dialogue is a big category. There's so much to say about this, but in the context of this training, what I would say is make sure that you are connecting the dialogue to the emotional connection we're building with the characters. And you can also connect it with backstory once you're past those vital first few pages. But have a reason for giving dialogue. And I want to also direct you back to, in the All Writers Welcome Facebook group, somebody posted a great link. I want to say it was Beth Burnett posted. I'll reshare. There's a guy with 10 tips on dialogue that are really, really helpful. So you may find those useful. We'll get those for you. All right. Next question. Is my villain evil enough, yet still able for readers to empathize with him? All right. Well, Cassandra, we talked about what builds empathy between readers and characters, and it is a vulnerability or a weakness or a heart's desire. And so the question is, can you give us one or both of those for your villain without making the focus too much on him? Okay, cheesy example. I recently watched the Smurfs movie with my 8.5-year-old niece. And Gargamel, even though he's cartoonish and he's a villain and he wants to just grab the Smurfs and take their power, we see that he's like this lonely guy and not even his cat respects him, and that it lends some reality to it. So the empathy is going to be about letting us see your villain as somebody who is human because he has a weakness and or a heart's desire. So if you feel like you can do either of those, that's going to be the key. Okay. Philo asks, since this is my first novel and I have no background in writing other than a love of words and telling stories, I fear that people will say it's bad and that it is poorly written or amateurish. Oh, if they do, we will we will defend you, Philo. No, but I want to tell you one of the most powerful things I learned this year. The All Writers Welcome book club, which some of you have joined. It's open to anybody, by the way. We read cool books about writing. We read in September Lisa Cron's Wired for Story. And it is this fascinating book all about what really gets people to keep flipping the pages in a story. And you know what she says loud and clear? It is not your quality of writing. It's your story. It's 100%, is it a compelling story? So take the pressure off. Know that with each book you write, your writing is going to get better. You will improve in style. You will find your voice. You will, do all these things that will improve your writing. But the most important thing you can do is focus on your story. That makes me feel like, woohoo! I don't know, Philo, how that makes you feel. But don't worry. Know that your writing will always improve. Focus on the story. That's what's going to grab people. Great example. People argue they fight tooth and nail over Stephen King. There are people who love him. There are people who say, I don't know why this guy sells books. He can't write, to save his life. And the reason people who love him is because of his stories and the world he draws you into. So I'm just saying, story is key, and help inviting readers to connect with that story. Somebody asked about making sure the protagonist is interesting enough to capture reader interest. That's going to go back to either the vulnerability of some kind of weakness or the heart's desire. That's how we connect with people. And, it's a mistake to try to make your protagonist fascinating. In fact, if you give your protagonist too many like cool talents and interests, you can end up building a character we have a hard time connecting to, because we're like, what can't this person do, right? You might end up with a Mary Sue character, which is somebody who is so perfect in every way and looks good even first thing in the morning without any makeup. And people go, I can't connect to that. I can't relate. So when you're thinking of making, I would say, replace interesting in your vocabulary when it comes to what you're talking about with your main character with connected. You want your reader to connect, and that's going to be show us a weakness or show us a heart's desire. It's really that simple. Okay, now in terms of, then you can say like, oh, what is a vulnerability or a heart's desire that I'm personally interested in and that I don't think is represented a lot? Then that would be very interesting. All right. Deb says, I'm just trying to figure out how to tie together 3 seemingly unrelated plot lines into a seamless ending that answers questions posed from book 1 all the way through book 4, the final book in the series. Oh my goodness. That sounds like you need to do some planning and strategic plotting, Deb. But what will make us feel complete is if your main characters, and if you have seemingly unrelated plot lines, I'm imagining that you have different characters as well, to make sure that each of those characters, I got frozen. I don't know where I froze you guys, but I'm back. So Deb was asking how she can make all these seemingly different plot lines come together. If you can give us closure on each one, that will be the most important thing. If they intersect in some way, that would be helpful. But making sure you give us the closure, the completion by showing us how the seeds you planted at the beginning for each plot line are coming to fruition. That will be key. But that sounds like a big task, and maybe you want to get some more help, a coaching session and look at outline and plotting and planning, and maybe I would be able to give you some more specific suggestions on that, because that sounds like quite the tall order. Shauna is saying it's so true about the story versus writing. She says she's read some really good stories with terrible structure and rolled your eyes through the entire thing. The story is key. It really is. That's why people are reading. Okie doke. Laura Lynn said, I'd love to learn more about crafting distinct, personal, individual, fun, and relatable characters that readers love, and I'm always interested in plotting and outlining processes. So the personal, individual, fun, relatable characters kind of all go into the same category as just relatable. Because here's the thing. When we connect with somebody emotionally, we don't think, oh, I like this person because she's the only person I know who, has perfectionist tendencies, or she's the only person I know who has a strained relationship with her mother. We're not connecting with people because they're unique. We're connecting with people because we're connecting with them, right? So when you take the time to get to know somebody, and when you get to know a character, you're like, oh, I care about what happens to you. Your readers are not sitting there going, oh, well, I've read a different story where somebody, really wanted to, make a name for himself, so I'm not interested, right? There's no part of us that does that. Remember, this is about bypassing the critical thinking and going straight to the emotion. So if you give us a character we can empathize with, and that's the relatable part, then you can, have fun and play with those other pieces of who this character is and what makes her distinct. But don't get overly, don't get overly worried about making your character unique, because again, that's something that draws us out of the reality of the story and draws us out of the emotional connection, is if we start having the feeling, oh, this character just got loaded up with all of the bells and whistles because the author wanted me to think she was special. So I hope that makes sense. Focus on the emotional connection and let that naturally guide you. And what I highly recommend is doing free writes. Those are where you take on the voice of your character and you explore how she feels and what she thinks and what she wants and what she wishes for. And it's a very natural way to come up with what your character really wants in the world and what drives her without forcing it, without pushing it. All right. Sandra says, I'm strong on characters, but weak on plot. I need to work on that. Connect the plot to the main character. Yeah, you know, Sandra, the best way to do that is to focus on creating that vulnerability or the heart's desire for your main character, because that's what really should drive the plot. You know, that is where you take us on a journey that's about, you know, so I gave you the example in the live training about the character Evelyn Couch from Fried Green Tomatoes. And there are a lot of interesting characters in that movie. It's, you know, kind of two stories at once. But we care about knowing whether she will ever stop being a pushover. We see her at the beginning of the story just taking crap from everybody. And we want to go on the journey of what will she do with that? Will she ever get over it? So creating a plot is so intimately tied to your main character's point of relation to us as the audience. Sandra, since you are in the All Writers Welcome Academy, if you have not had a chance to do it already, I highly recommend going through the training, creating your central conflict. Because it's all about using a point of inspiration, like your main character is one of the points of inspiration, to create a central conflict that in turn drives the plot. So you might find that helpful. Yvonne says, I worry that my plot isn't as strong as I think it is. After 7 edits, I'm sick of my own work. Oh no, Yvonne, we've all had that experience. I so feel for you of like, oh, I don't even know anymore. Is this even a story? What I would recommend is not doing any further edits without a specific intention. So a specific intention would mean, you know, all right, I want to restructure my plot so that this happens first because that would give me da-da-da-da-da, whatever is the, you know, have a really concrete reason. If you feel like you're overwhelmed and you can't read through with enough of an objective eye, this is a time when you need to ask for help from other people. So this might be finding a critique group, you know, getting some writing buddies. If you feel like you want, you know, a real overhaul, message me. We can set up a writing coaching session. But the key here would be to stop revising until you know exactly what you want from your edits. And also, here's something to keep in mind. At a certain point, you are better. It's better just to call the project done. You're going to keep writing more. You're going to keep writing better. There's this expression I love that is, the first pancake is for the cat. And it refers to this idea that when you start making pancakes, the pan's just not hot enough. It's like impossible. No matter how much I test it, you know, I'm like, oh, now it should be hot. First pancake is just not the best pancake. But I have to put in the first pancake so that I can put in the rest. If I wait to put in that first pancake, I'll never eat pancakes. So I don't want you to put out a book that you know how to make better. I don't want you to go, I'm done. Here, have this. But it may be time to investigate, you know, is this the best that this project can get? And do I need to just leave it alone? And maybe that doesn't mean publish it. Maybe it means let it rest and move on to another project. So there's a lot of strategies. If you want to talk about this more, I invite you to PM me. And we can talk some options. But yeah, that's a hard one, but stop editing for now. Stop editing. Sherry says, I'm worried about backstory. I have a lot of mythology in my story and I don't want to overwhelm with too much info or leave them scratching their heads with too little. Okay, Sherry, I don't know if you were able to watch the live training, but I talked about this young adult fantasy, Dragon's Blood by Jane Yolen. I actually read the first page, but I cheated a little bit. I'm going to tell you how I cheated. I did not read you guys the introduction. The introduction does tell me where I am. I'm on this planet and it's in space and it's this, and it gives a little bit of a history. And then it says at the end, like, excerpt from the Encyclopedia Galaxia, 29th edition, blah, 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 blah. Okay. There definitely are some genres for which not having any context will be confusing. So the cheat, if you're writing fantasy, would be to do a preface, an introduction, something that gives people a little bit of grounding. not everybody's going to read the introduction. So that's not where you're hooking your readers. That's where they're, you know, they have the option to go back and get a little backstory if they want. And I know it's something I'll do. I'll start on the first page, and then if I feel like, oh, I don't get it, I'll go back to the introduction. So you're still getting that first page momentum. But when you have a chance to watch the training, Sherry, notice that the backstory, it often interrupts the momentum of building the connection with the character. So even if it's just the first few pages, even if you can just hold off for those first 3 or 4 pages of your story, depending on how long your first chapter is, before launching into a lot of backstory, that will make a huge difference. And, you know, this is a place where beta readers will be incredibly helpful, or a writing critique group, because you'll be able to ask people directly, did it make sense? Could you tell this? You know, what needs clarifying? Your readers will definitely make inferences. Once they're emotionally connected, they will work to understand. They'll want to know what's going on. So keep that in mind. You know, readers are people who think, but then you can get direct feedback if you ask other people what makes sense, or what did you get? You know, describe to me what you think is going on, and then you'll hear you'll hear if you have enough backstory that way. But hold off for those first few pages, get the emotional connection. Amber said, I worry that my characters don't have enough depth to keep readers attached to them. Ooh, depth. Interesting. I'd love to hear more about that. The key thing is to make that emotional connection. We can emotionally connect with characters who aren't the deepest people ever. Janet Ivanovich, the popular author, has the whole Stephanie Plum series. Stephanie Plum, not the deepest protagonist you ever met, but we connect to her, we relate to her, we understand what she's going through. So, you know, deep is not as important as understandable, relatable. And you, again, might think, just as I, you know, advise somebody else, instead of asking, is my character interesting? Ask, is my character somebody people can empathize with? Maybe have that same thing. Instead of, is my character deep? Ask, is my character somebody people can relate to and have empathy for? All right. Amanda said, is less more when setting the atmosphere? Can you go overboard with description? Oh, Amanda, I love this question. Yes, absolutely. You can go overboard. Remember, your goal is to create an unconscious experience for readers. The whole point of setting the mood is to bypass the critical thinking, go straight to the emotions, and have people feel like, oh yeah, this is a good place. As soon as we start noticing that you're trying to make us feel like it's a good place, all that work is undone, right? So like if I go into the nice restaurant and there's the music and there's like a gurgling fountain, and then all of a sudden, the maitre d' comes over to me and shakes my hand and is like, oh, we so hope you have a great experience. All of a sudden I'm like, oh, charm is over, right? It's too much. It's too far, because you're pointing out to me what you're trying to do. Absolutely, you can go too far with setting mood. You want to just cherry pick. Remember, the action step I gave in the live training was take the first 3 pages of your book and look for just a total of 3 to 5 words you could make more specific. You want to choose things that count. You want to focus on what will make people feel, but you don't want them to start noticing that you're trying to make them feel, right? Defeats the purpose. It'd be like being on that first date and your date says to you, oh, I picked this restaurant because I feel like it's really romantic and that will put you in a romantic mood. Ew, right? You're like, creepola. So yeah, definitely keep it subtle. And there's no set amount of, you know, how many words or how, you know, there's no magical number of the right number of words to create mood. It's something that you'll get with feedback and as other people read and as you read your story. Rita says, how important is vocabulary in creating the mood? Well, I would say using specific words is important, like said versus whispered, and making sure that people know what the action looks like, you know, run versus sprinted or jogged. There are certain words that definitely show us exactly what is in your mind. But if you mean fancy vocabulary, then not at all. If you mean just word variety and word choice, yes, it's important, but there's no element of this that should be fancy writing. Like, I'm going to go to thesaurus and pick out the longest and most unused adjective I can. Nope, it doesn't help your readers connect. That would be like the making it too obvious what you're trying to do, where they get thrown out of the reality. Abdul asks, can you set the mood with description as well? Absolutely. One of my favorite like mood description book openings is of Mice and Men, where we get this idyllic picture of, there's no characters in it. The first few paragraphs is just this babbling brook and this Eden-like setting. Same thing with the opening of Lord of the Flies. So absolutely use description and just focus on your, word choice, your sentence length, and the imagery that you use. Okay, Yvonne says, I always hear that dialogue tags should remain neutral. Using things like growl is supposedly bad. I personally disagree. Why are those kinds of dialogues tags so often frowned upon? Everybody has her own opinion, and probably it's the kind of thing where once we see it too much, we just go, just don't do it at all, right? People get tired of seeing something overused, and so they just put a kibosh on it. They're like, nope, nobody can use this at all anymore, ever again. You're cut off. But what do you feel works? The most important thing, again, as I've mentioned, is you have to create a mood subtly. The point of the mood is it goes to what people are feeling, not what they're thinking. So if your words are drawing a lot of attention to themselves, that's not good. But for me, in those example sentences I read you, like the difference between he said and he whispered is really key. Like, I know he's right up close to her and there's a more intimate relation happening. Growled would be an example of like maybe an extreme word, right? But again, it depends on your genre. Who's your audience? If I'm writing for young adults, growled is maybe perfectly appropriate, right? Depending on who your reader is, you can be more obvious, or you might have to scale back some. So I don't think there's one right answer. I think the reason people say not to do it is because they see it overused and they get annoyed with it. But whatever you can do to create that mood and make it something that readers can feel, I say is a positive. That's my opinion. All right. Rita says, how important is backstory and emotional connection for the villain? Ooh, depends on your type of story. So villains and just simple antagonists are on a spectrum, right? And at the extreme, I was talking about the Smurf movie and Gargamel, and he's an extreme villain. Anybody in a cartoon, I'm just pure evil. I just do stuff because I like being evil. That's extreme. We don't connect at all. And then, sliding all the way up to the mild antagonist is, like your main character's best friend, who's somebody she cares about, and we know they have a good relationship, but they're like at odds at this one thing, and they, have a conflict, a main conflict surrounding that. So there's this whole sliding spectrum, and it's a matter of your genre. If you're writing like creepy thriller, we probably don't want to connect that much to your antagonist, to your villain. We probably just want him to be somebody really creepy and really scary. If you are writing drama, then definitely want to have some connection, because we want that tension between the two sides. It shouldn't be obvious from the beginning what's going to happen in the conflict. Romance slides up the spectrum even more. If there is an antagonist who's also the love interest, then we definitely want to be able to connect with that character. So what genre are you writing? What kind of story are you writing? What's the reason it would be important for us to connect with your villain would be the questions to ask yourself. And in terms of backstory, the backstory will be connected to the emotional connection for the villain. So that if you answer the emotional connection question, you'll answer the backstory question, because backstory is, you'll connect it. Lori said, so you don't need to tell the readers everything up front? Nope. Isn't that nice? And guess what? You guys have all experienced this. You've started watching a movie and you're like, wait, what's going on? If you're one of the terrible, annoying people like me, you voice that question to the person next to you, whether or not you know that person. Wait, who is that? What's going on? Right? But I don't get up and leave the movie. I don't say, I don't get it, and storm out. I am asking those questions because I'm interested. I care. The movie started, I'm like, I'm there, I'm in it, I want to know what's going on, and I'm invested, and I'm working to try to understand. So no, you don't have to give all the story up front. Shauna says, I'm finding that people like my terrible villain and antagonist and are rooting for him. And they don't necessarily like the main character. So what makes a bad guy bad? Okay, what makes a bad guy bad is just how you position him in the story. And I want to give you guys a great example of this. There was this, trend of doing retellings, and the movie Maleficent is a great example of this. Maleficent is the villain in the original Sleeping Beauty movie. Why is she the villain? Well, it's not because she acts bad. She's the villain because the story we're following is of Princess Aurora. And in Princess Aurora's story, where she wants to not die on her 16th birthday and be able to fall in love, the person who's thwarting her is Maleficent. In Maleficent is the hero of the story because we are following her from when she's betrayed by Prince Philip, and we want to know, will she ever get her revenge or reclaim her power? So what makes the bad guy is not the fact that he's bad. It's how he's positioned in the story. Another great example, Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog. It was a Joss Whedon internet show. And the main character, the person we're following, is Neil Patrick Harris as a villain. And his antagonist is a superhero who is a big jerk. But the reason, and it flip-flops what we think is the good guy and the bad guy. Yeah, point of view, Shauna, and whose story we are supposed to empathize with and follow, and yes, I love Dr. Horrible too, and I think it's so clever. It's whose story we get the seeds for at the beginning and that we want to see work its way up to the climax. So if people are not liking your main character, you got a couple options. You could just totally switch. You could say, oh, I'm going to tell this story as the bad boy's story. But if you want to keep things the way they are with your main character as your main character and your villain as your villain, you have to make it clear that we're supposed to connect with your main character and give us ways to do that, even if he's not a good guy. So just that's a matter of point of view, as you're saying. Anne says, when should you write the prologue, after you've written your story or before? Oh, I would say that's a personal question. I personally would do it after I've written. For me, that would be like writing the introduction. And I want to wait till I've written the introduction until I know everything else that I'm going to say. And that also means that you get to wait and see whether you need a prologue. Maybe you're able to give the information and the backstory and the context in another place or in another way throughout your story. So yeah, I would do it after, because I would want to know, do I need it? And if I need it, what exactly do I want to put in it? You don't want to end up putting tons of stuff in your prologue that doesn't pertain to the rest of your story, because then readers just kind of go into tune out mode. Cecilia says, I have two main characters. I have a clear climax for one of them, but ... I'm not sure I do for the other. I guess I need to work on that one. Yeah, Cecilia, I love the way you're thinking about this. That if somebody is going to be a protagonist, she has to have a climax. Main characters get climaxes. That is a rule. So think about the seeds you've already planted for this person, and think about how, how those seeds could come to fruition to give us an of course climax. If you watch the training, you saw the climax should feel like, oh, of course she has to have a scene where she has to face that fear, or she has to finally stand up to somebody, or she has to use the strength that she's gathered this whole time. So think about what that could be. And you can have separate climaxes. They don't have to be the same scene. I think that works really well, to have them, staggered like that, one after the other. All right, and Abdul asked, what's your feeling on prologue in a cyberpunk, like a Blade Runner type of story? Can the descriptive backstory still pull on emotion/intrigue before meeting the main character in the first chapter? Ooh, that is a tricky one. Okay, so you guys, even though the best way to get your reader to connect to your story is through your character. There are definitely genres where people are looking for the world first and foremost, right? They're like, so it would be like you're watching the movie and you see the scenery and everything that's going on before you get any people. And cyberpunk as a genre, I don't know that well. I'm thinking like what I know about Blade Runner and that really like edgy, gritty, almost noir kind of feel. Yeah, you can get people hooked on the world, but it still has to be a specific mood. Like what draws people to Blade Runner is not the description of the time. What draws people is the gritty feel you get as like, bam, you're in it. As soon as you see the first scene, it's really clear what the mood is. So for cyberpunk genre, I would say, I'm not well versed enough in that genre to know if that's the norm, but here's what you could do. Read some of your favorite authors in the genre and look at the beginnings of their stories. The people who are selling well, do they get away with that? Do they get away with just having the scenery and the context and the mood before we get the people? Because that might be a convention in the genre, right? I'm giving you guys what works for all genres, but each genre does have its own little special conventions. So yeah, go check out some of your favorites and some of the best sellers in your genre and see, are they getting away with that? Because as long as you're setting the mood, you're still going to draw people in emotionally. Okay. Oh yeah, Ella says the book Wicked by Gregory Maguire is another great villain hero switch, and it's all about point of view. Whom do we get to know? Whose point of view do we take on? Whose story do we follow? That's what makes somebody the protagonist, and that's why it's nice to talk in terms of main character as opposed to good guy, bad guy, because you can have a protagonist who's not a very nice person. You can have an antagonist that everybody thinks is fantastic, but doesn't work out. Oh, Abdul, good. I'm glad you're live. Does that make sense? Do you feel like you can do that? Go check out some cyberpunk books and see what people are doing, because it may be so. Like that's a world heavy genre. So as long as you're creating the mood, I think that could work. All right, those were all the questions that Ella grabbed for me in the live training and what people posted beforehand. And you guys, I have just been talking at you, so I'm going to stop talking at you and remind you that our next live training is coming up next Wednesday. And Ella's going to be talking about how to get fans and followers with giveaways. I am super excited about that one. I can't wait. You will get an email reminder if you are on the Blab newsletter list. And the way to get on the Blab newsletter list, or if you're on our newsletter at all, I take it back. You'll get it if you're on our newsletter at all, and you can sign up if you're not at allwriterswelcome.com/newsletter. And if you are like, oh, this book launching thing sounds cool, make sure you stay tuned in this group. We're going to have more information about the book launch like a boss boot camp that starts in the second week of January. You guys, it's going to be so much fun. We're having the best time planning all of the content and figuring out how we can get you guys to rocket your book sales. Okie doke. And we're also, of course, running the baby book launch challenge. So if you're like, oh, I want to try some marketing, I want to try some book launching, you can sign up for that at allwriterswelcome.com/launch. Ella, help me out. Ella is the boss of that. She will know. All right, Ella, thank you so much for grabbing questions and for all of your help. All of you, thank you so much for being on the question and answer, and make sure to watch the live training if you haven't had a chance to already. Have a fantastic rest of your day and happy writing. Bye.